she said we can't tell anyone about this because we would get in trouble. And I was very much a rule follower and kept it to myself for over about 20 years until I eventually suffered some pretty severe depression and had to go to the hospital and then got hooked up with a therapist and then really talked about that. Everything was going great. So most of the time, from what I've read and understood, when things start to go well, it's almost like your mind and your body sort of let you know this is an okay time for you to start the healing process. Many of our males are feeling uh, left behind in society. The fact that they don't know exactly what it means to be, again, a real man. Everyone loves Batman. Like you mentioned Batman anywhere in the world, like Batman is that dude. Like he is a man's man, okay? But he's also like extremely hypervigilant. He is someone who has to control every single situation because he doesn't want to feel like that lost little boy that just watched his parents get murdered. It's just moments like that that remind me, just like, man, like we are trained at a very young, like this throughout our entire lives, that men are the ones who do the victimizing and men are strong, and there's no way that a woman or a girl can hurt them in any way.
I need it yesterday. Oh, still I fall again and again. Oh, can I afford to cry? I paid the price for every lie, and I, for an eye, oh why, every other day I feel a little like I did before.
Hello, I'm Lorward, and welcome to a conversation with Kenneth Rogers, a monthly program devoted to education about healing from trauma caused by sexual abuse, presented by Voices Beyond Assault.
And I'm Craig Heiting. As most of you are here today, Lorward and I are also survivors of sexual abuse. Voices Beyond Assault presents these programs because we understand that men and women who suffer sexual assault are not always heard. We want to amplify their voices, empower them to heal, and provide resources that are needed.
And as such, we would first like to remind you that this program will contain discussions about emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. It may also include explicit language. While today's program puts a spotlight on the healing journey specific to men, sexual assault and abuse is prevalent among all people, and our programs are all inclusive.
Today, we have a conversation with Kenneth Rogers Jr. Kenneth Rogers Jr., author of How to Heal Your Inner Superhero series. This unique series of books uses DC Comics superhero and villain archetypes, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychology, and his own autobiographical journey as a survivor to help other survivors of childhood sexual abuse heal.
Any series of healing books have earned over 26 Indie Book Awards. Each guide in How to Heal Your Inner Superhero series spotlights a different path toward healing for survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
With a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Education, Kenneth lives and teaches secondary English in Baltimore, Maryland, with his wife, Sarah, and two daughters, Mirus and Amare.
Kenny, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for writing such an incredible series of books for all survivors.
No problem.
Before we get into all of your books, Kenny, can you tell us about your story of childhood sexual abuse? It started when you were 8, right?
Yes. So it was with my sister. It happened for about 2 years when my parents were gone on leaving the house, either going to work or just going out having a good time. And it started with watching different pornographic movies, and then that's when really the grooming sort of happened. And then from there, the actual uh, rape and sexual assault happened on and off for 2 years until abruptly, not knowing why, she just said, "We can't do this anymore. It's bad." And then left with a whole bunch of questions, just growing up, like, I don't know, just a tremendous amount of questions about how bad was it, how I was going to get in trouble, and just whether or not I was still a good person and worthy of actually going to heaven, was going to eventually go to hell, did I lose my virginity? Just lots of different questions that many male survivors or just any sexual assault survivors have and go through.
How old was your sister at the time?
So if I was 8, we're 5 years apart. Um, so I believe it started actually at 7, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 11, 12 years old. And then she until about 13, 14 years old for her.
So things you're kind of talking about how things had naturally concluded, and she was just saying, "Hey, we can't do this anymore." After that had finished, you're, still very young. I'm assuming that there wasn't really anybody that you were like, "Hey, this thing happened to me. This was weird."
No, because I mean, she said we can't tell anyone about this because we would get in trouble, and I was very much a rule follower and making sure I didn't want to get in trouble. And secrets were also a big part of our house. Like I don't know, don't tell mom and dad about this or else we'll get in trouble. Don't do this because you'll get in trouble. So a lot of not tell, not do this because you might get in trouble for it. So kept it to myself for over about 20 years, until I eventually suffered some pretty severe depression and had to go to the hospital, and then got hooked up with a therapist and then really talked about that.
So that was around when you were 28. So what was your mental state, or did you notice any effects on, did you think about it all the time, or what was your mental state from the time of 8 to 28? Did you just bury it or what?
Um, I mean, yeah. I mean, for the most part, I mean, I was more focused on making sure I didn't get in trouble. So I was more focused on being a perfectionist. Like if you talk to anyone that knew me, anyone in high school, middle school, like Kenny was the one that got straight A's, was the one that was involved in every after school activity, was straight laced. He did what was right because I didn't want to be seen as someone who did something wrong. So that meant just making sure that I crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, and was seen as like a good person, trying to uh, be as good as possible to sort of, if I could, I guess, redeem myself.
And then so what changed at 28?
Um, Everything. Um, I had a daughter, Mirus was born. Um, we got our first house, me and my wife. Got a first real steady job career. Everything was going great. So most of the time, from what I've read and understood, when things start to go well, it's almost like your mind and your body sort of let you know this is an okay time for you to start the healing process. And so you enter the emergency stage and you start to have really severe panic attacks, memories, triggers start happening. You don't really know why. But for me, it was more, I was in a safe place where all those things were able to come to light and to happen. And so it just, it just all happened at once. It seemed like it shouldn't have been happening. It seems like I should be extremely happy and joyous and everything should be good. But it was actually exactly the opposite because I guess my mind and my body said, yeah, you can deal with this now.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because you're talking about when you're growing up, internally you're like really struggling, you have all these thoughts and these feelings, but externally people are like, oh, like he's doing great, he's getting straight A's, he's going above and beyond. And then now as you like transition into this like starting, hey, all the things externally are really safe and sound. And now the roles have completely reversed. So I find that very, very interesting about just how our bodies have really adapted to it. It's like, hey, this is the time for you to really go through these things rather than never going through that. Um, I want to transition into your first book. It's not about survivors at all. You called it Raped Black Survivor. It's a memoir. And kind of what went into your process of deciding to write this, what you wanted to write about.
So it's rape black male.
Mhm.
And so actually that's not my first book. My
Oh,
first book was actually a book of short stories. I wrote a whole bunch of fiction before all of this because for the most part, I lived on the page. The page was a place where I felt safe and secure. And for a lot of survivors, that's really what it's about. It's trying to find that ability to find that ability that to feel safe and to find your home. So I read all the time. I wrote, I journaled, and my safe place was on the page. But I started writing Rape Black Male, and I wrote it because I wanted it really for me, and that was really me telling my story about me being a survivor and really addressing those three major topics of what it means to be a male survivor, what it means to be Black in today's society. Because at the time, I mean, even now, it was very much prevalent, like armed Black male, dangerous Black male, hostile Black male, but there was no real empathy or sadness or seeing that Black males as really being having the ability to be victimized or to be hurt. And then the last one was really talking about what it means to be a male in today's society, whether that be a mentor, a father, um, just a caring individual. So I really wanted to address those three major topics, those three major subjects, so that other people didn't really feel as alone, but also I was able to tell my story the way I wanted to, and just tell my story.
So in that book, you talked about, I think it covers homelessness, drug addiction, suicide attempts. This all happened at the time you turned 28. It hadn't happened before that. And how did your wife react to all of this?
No drug addiction. Never addicted to drugs. And again, like straight lace. I rarely drank. Avid workout person. Um, so didn't really do pretty much anything until, well, I mean, still don't really do anything. Two beers, Rogers. That's what most people call me. So uh, my wife, like she knew, like I told my wife about the abuse beforehand, so she knew all of this that had occurred. So this wasn't out of the blue. But again, when I told her, I was like, it happened before, happened in the past, everything's fine now. Uh, and it was really sort of out of left field that this sort of happened and occurred. But while going through the healing process, she's always been supportive, making sure I get the space that I need, going to therapy and getting help and support. So she's always been a very constant source of help and support throughout this process.
So talk about the homelessness then, because it tells a story of being homeless. When were you homeless in this?
Yeah. So my junior and senior year in high school, um, I was homeless. My mom and dad had a pretty rough divorce or separation. So me and my mom, we moved out and we moved into the basement of a cousin's house, and we stayed there for about a year. My dad stayed in the house, and while he was there, we thought that he was taking care of the house, paying the bills, and then he left and he went to live somewhere else. He went to live. He moved back home in the South. And so me and my mom, we moved back into the house. We got everything turned like all the no, we my mom thought she had like got the lights and everything turned back on, had caught up with the bills until we got a foreclosure notice. And then our house was foreclosed on, and we had to live in the basement of another relative's house. And I lived there my senior year, um, just, going through the motions and pretty much trying to get out as much as possible in order to go to college, and then sort of escape as much badness as I could.
So homelessness wasn't necessarily related to the
Mm-mm.
abuse. Okay.
No,
Um,
just bad living situations, bad family, relationships.
okay.
I think it's like something very overlooked where people recognize like the space and the environment that you live in. I feel like plays severely into the way that you think and the way that you operate in your mind. Was that something really difficult for you to be like, hey, I know my situation is bad, but like up here, I'm solid, like I know what I want to do? Or was it kind of really easy for those thoughts to kind of creep in and be like, ah, this is all that is it there? Or yeah, kind of talk about your headspace there.
I mean, I guess it was always like a mix of the two. Like I know what I want to do, I know what I need to do in order to get better and to not really heal, but make sure I get into a better living situation, but also um just the negative automatic thoughts,
Mm,
like you suck, you're not worthy, you're a piece of crap. Those automatic thoughts are they were very prevalent back then. And then once I was able to like get out of high school and go to college, like full tuition, full ride, all of that stuff, those thoughts didn't really go away. So in my opinion, I think like the first emergency stage really happened then because I actually dropped out my freshman year after a week. And then I eventually ended up going back after that year. uh yeah, I suffered severe depression as soon as I got there, and I just couldn't really go on. So the headspace was not really wasn't it wasn't I wasn't able to stay, but eventually I went back.
So these symptoms occurred before you got married and before you were 28 when you decided that you needed to start the healing process. And was the book Rape Black Male about the healing process? Was that part of your healing process that you felt you needed to do? And
I think it was. I didn't really go over the healing process as much. It was more just me expressing those three major categories. It wasn't until Heroes, Villains, and Healing that I really started to go through and really go through the healing process and make a real attempt to help other survivors.
But you were a teacher when you wrote that book, right? You were a
Hmm.
teacher at that
Yeah.
point, and the book came out.
Hmm.
And I'm asking this because it was in Heroes, Villains, and Healing. So the book came out. What was the reaction of the book from the rest of your family, your school, and your students?
Um, my school was not as supportive as I would have liked. So much so that I was harassed to the point of getting a viral heart infection. And I was out for about 3 months. It was the exact same as like a heart attack. It registers the exact same when they do blood tests and blood work, and it said like, "Hey, you had a heart attack. We're gonna keep you overnight. Have a look at it. Go through, um, look at some cardiovascular stuff, see what's going on." And what they found was so there's a sac that keeps your heart in place, and that sac had gotten infected, and so it made it difficult for the heart to pump. It had gotten swollen, and it was not very good. Um, my family, I guess, mixed reaction. My brother and my mom always extremely supportive, but not so much from my dad and my sister. Um, it was a little difficult on those two fronts, but mostly everyone else, well, my wife, my brother, and my mother were all pretty supportive. Um, what was the other one? Was it
And
community?
the students were walking around the school with the book. right?
Yeah, the students, they thought that it was pretty cool because I said before I had written fiction beforehand, and I always tell my students like the publishing process, and like, hey, I'm a author. This is the process that I've gone through, and like encourage them like, hey, you can do this too. It's not like this is any real secret, but you guys can start this. So I would tell them with every single book and like, hey, this is the book that I made. This is the book that I created. This is the next book that's coming out. Also told their parents, I was like, hey, I made this book. Um, so that you guys know the parents were extremely supportive. They were like, that's really empowered. That's really powerful. That's really good. The students wanted to read it. I brought a few. I put them in the library. The students were very energetic, and then was able to get some supports for I believe two of the students who needed and called CPS in order to get them the support that they needed for that. But the school did not really appreciate or did not see the value in the book, and the students had to actually get some permission slips if they wanted to read it. But I ended up just taking it completely out of my library.
Mm, see. Yeah, so you kind of talked about prior to this book, you had written a little bit more about fiction. This book comes out, you're exploring a lot of these ideas around culture, your gender, your sexual, all of these things, and you have this response. Is this kind of the tipping point for you to think, hey, this is something that I want to continue to write about and explore? And, obviously Heroes and Villains comes out next. It's like, what was kind of the rationale behind that?
Um, I mean, I while I was writing Rape Black Male, like I was still going to therapy. I was still talking to Susan, my therapist. So I was still reading different material. And while going through therapy, I was like, there's a lot of connections here between superheroes. And I was telling my therapist about them, and I was starting to do some reading on my own, even though she was like, you really should not be doing this work on your own. You need to be working with me. And I was like, but this is really cool stuff. So I started to see some major connections between um, the DC world superheroes and like different conversations, different things that they were talking about in um, The Courage to Heal, which is a book that centers around female survivors and the healing process. And I was like, these coping mechanisms are really matching up with a lot of the heroes that I love. And so I started putting it down on paper, making those connections, doing some research on different comic books, and then really detailing the healing process and then my journey as a survivor in the last part of the book to really help other survivors, let them know like this is what I did, this is how you can see your connection, and then you can start on your own healing journey.
I mean, it's really a unique way to, and I have to say, it was really fun reading it um, because of that connection. And though I wanted to see how you were going to possibly connect all these superheroes, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But it was very different way, and probably in a way it was more open. It made you more open to reading it because it was you wanted, a lot of books by survivors, they're very heavy and you read them, and in this case it was the connection was like, oh yeah, okay, that's so interesting. That's quite a Were you always a comic fan? And did you have to get permission from Warner Brothers Discovery to use the DC comic characters?
So one, I've always been a comic character fan. I have not always read the comics, because growing up, again, I wanted to seem extremely intelligent, put together, and seeing myself with the
Oh no,
comic.
we're gonna get in trouble if you go there.
Well, I had if I had a comic, everyone would be like, "Oh, well, he's not smart enough, he's not
Yeah.
sophisticated enough." So
Nothing against, nothing saying nothing about people who
no,
do read comics.
no, not at
No.
all, absolutely not.
There's
But
just
I was
very
like,
much
"Oh,
a stereotype
gotta have a
associated with
novel.
it.
I got to read these books, these big books all the time." But I used to always watch, like, I know X-Men 97 is big right now, but like when X-Men first came out back in the 90s, I was watching that. Spider-Man, the animated series, Batman, the animated series, watching all those, like they were my go-to. They were my safe place. Um, and so I've always loved those. But then when I started researching and writing this book, I was like, I want something more concrete. I don't want movies. I don't want different directors' interpretation. I want actual literature that you can go back to and support and justify certain arguments, and that people can go back and say, hey, I can read this, I can analyze this, I can see this image, and I can make that connection to it. So that's why I chose the comics. And it was and it was more difficult. I didn't want something easy. Um, Watching a movie and like analyzing it that way, that's, in my opinion, it's too easy. But actually reading the comics and making those valid connections, it's more concrete, it's a little more difficult, which gives it a little more weight. And I did not have to get permission from DC because I'm not creating anything new. I'm using the comic books in a way that they're already written. I'm just applying the story arc and those characters and those situations to different therapies, to different coping mechanisms, to see them through a different lens. It's almost like literary theory
Mhm.
and trying to apply the ideas of different literary theory and different literature to read it through the lens of, let's say, colonialism or an LGBTQ lens. It all depends on the way that you view it, and that's all I did was apply those different comic books and those different characters to a different lens so that you can see and understand their stories through your experiences as a survivor.
So I know my Disney friends who work at Disney are going to wonder why you didn't use Marvel.
That's coming. That's actually going to be out June 4th.
Oh, wow. We
Oh,
Yeah,
uncovered an exclusive here.
yeah, I know. So that's the next one. The reason I start off with DC is because DC is what I knew. And DC was darker. And I figured like there was more trauma involved with DC. Also, it was a lot harder to find material for Marvel. Like it was easier to find start off material for DC. DC came out with these white uh thick compilations of books from like one of the first times they appeared all the way to like the present, and it gave you like a good overview of all the really good comics that they've had with this character over the last, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 years. And so I bought these compilations. They were great in telling you like, hey, this is where they were, this is where they are now. So it was a lot easier to really get started with those books. With Marvel, and I searched, I couldn't find that material that I needed to really hit the ground running. It's taken this long for me to do the research needed in order to make sure I did it right, to make sure I wrote a book that was worth the time and effort for a survivor to say, hey, I can apply this and what's happening to myself to these different characters. It's taken that long because like the Marvel universe is so continuous. It's so wide and expansive that it's hard to be able to say like, hey, this is where I want to jump in. This is a good starting point, but it's much more sprawling. DC has stopped and started so many different times. It's a little easier to say like, okay, I'm going to start here after Crisis on Infinite Earths and then pick up um, just before, I don't know, some other major crisis that they always go through.
Interesting.
yeah, charting the Marvel universe is pretty chaotic. It's like it's a very much you need to navigate it through yourself, and you're like, okay, each step of the way, you're like, how does this fit into the greater narrative that I'm trying to explain? And so I like
Yeah.
can totally understand it. And like growing up, it was very much the case for me where it's like, yeah, all I knew was DC. I was just like Marvel. Like, why would I read Marvel? Like DC comics are everywhere. So I totally
Yeah.
get that. How much of this is like I'm so curious, like it sounds like your wife has been very supportive of your writing process. How much is she like, are you talking to her about these things? Is she like a comic fan at all? Or she's like, hey, you do your thing?
And see, uh, I try and talk to her about it. I
Uh-huh.
try and relate as much as possible, but for the most part, it's just like, uh-huh, okay, yeah, that's really it's really good. But I do talk to her about like these things, but I I wrote a book with her in mind. So How to Save Your Inner Wonder Woman is really for the caregivers and loved ones of survivors because she was not really she didn't really know like the not really the ins and outs of the comic universe, but like the steps of the healing process and like what she was doing. Like, is what I'm doing helping? Is it not helping? What should I be doing? What should I not be doing? And I really based that off of uh the idea of like metabolizing your stress, secondary traumatic stress, and how to suffer or how to heal from burnout, compassion fatigue, and really help other caregivers and loved ones like really understand like you need to take care of yourself as well as helping making sure that you are giving them the support that they need in their healing journey.
Well, so let's dive into the first book in the series called Heroes, Villains, and Healing, which I happily read. Um, it won 4 National Book Awards, I will say. The first portion begins by asking the reader if he's a hero and then talks about the hero code. Can you tell us about the hero code and why that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So every single survivor has, whether they know it or not, they have in their head their idea of what it means to be who they are and to make sure that they are surviving, whether that be they don't get help, or they are going to be perfectionists, are going to accomplish all their tasks. Like they have in their head what defines them as a person, and if they break that code, if they go against those things, it's almost like they are betraying themselves, and then they go through a severe state of depression. Sort of like thinking, like, if you mention Batman, Batman does not have a gun. Like that is against his hero code. He does not have a gun. Superman does not kill. So those hero codes really define who that hero is. And if they go against those things, then who are they? They have to redefine who they are. So developing that hero code is really important in the beginning so that survivors can understand like, okay, who am I and what are those codes that I've created in my head about what it means to be me? And if I break those rules, what is that going to do to me? And then you revisit that same hero code at the end of your journey, or not really the end because the journey's always continuing, but like how has that changed? And it should change because those automatic thoughts should be more I'm never going to get help to I'm human and these are things that all humans go through, or everything's my fault, everything's my responsibility to I can't control everything, and there are sometimes just bad things are going to happen. So that hero code should really change from the beginning, and you should see like, hey, that hero code is wrong. To changing it so that it's more inclusive and more forgiving for what you've been through.
Did you have a hero code at the beginning, and how did that change?
Oh yeah, I definitely included my hero code in there. My hero code was do not accept help. Um, no one loves you. No one's gonna take care of you. You have to do it on your own. And uh, if you get help, someone's always gonna want something in return from you. Uh, and that was very much like defining me. And I have to be perfect. I'm not perfect. If I'm not doing absolutely the best job, then I'm a worthless piece of crap. And there's no reason for me to even exist. So that was very much my hero code.
Yeah, it's just like that's tough because what person is coming out being perfect? Like we all need help. We all need these things. And I think what you're really asking is like, hey, like look at your compass and realize that it's broken. Like realize and define that space for yourself and try to come back to a place of, like you said, like, in the inner family systems, they call it the inner leadership and the true self, the sanctified self, whatever version. But I think that's like a really great place to start off and say, hey, like, where are you at? Come as you are, and let's go from here and like go along this journey together, which I think is a really beautiful idea. Um,
Thanks.
you talk about the facade of Superman
Mhm.
and the two personas he fiercely protects, right? How are these personas linked to survivorship in males?
So I love how you talked about IFS, so internal family systems. Like I really talk about that in How to Master Your Inner Superman, about how like you've got the Superman facade, the Kal-El facade, and the Clark Kent facade, and that really matches up with the manager, the firefighter, and the I always forget the third one. Manager, firefighter, and exile. And like really matching up like who you are and like whether or not you are matching up with that idea of perfection. So you have the Clark Kent facade, which is really just trying to blend in. Like Clark Kent, he does not want to stick out. So many male survivors or survivors in general, they do not want to stick out. They do not want to be noticed because notice makes sure that other people see you and then you possibly be identified as a target, especially if you're identifying as a someone who fawns with their abuser to make sure that you reduce the amount of trauma that you suffer. And then you have that Superman facade, that Superman facade who is striving for perfection and striving to make sure like everything is great and golden, and that Superman is really that manager and making sure like, all right, I'm gonna put out this fire, put out this fire, put out this fire, always at work, always smiling, always making sure that everything is golden. And then you have that exile, and that exile is that Kal-El facade, at least for me, that Kal-El facade. And for many individuals, for many males, or just survivors in general, it's that idea of, am I man enough? Am I being a real man, or am I being black enough? Like for me, like I love comic books, Dragon Ball Z, like I would want to read a book more than I wanted to pick up a basketball. So like that idea of being black enough, like goes with the idea of Kal-El. Kal-El is Superman's Kryptonian heritage. So like is he Kryptonian enough, even though he never grew up there? And he's always trying to live up to those ideals of like, am I being a true Kryptonian, or am I just being whitewashed and being too human? So those three things really identify with not only me but many survivors, whether that be male, female, or anyone, because you're always going to have that idea of like, should I just blend in? Should I just be the manager and just like blend in with those around me? Should I just be perfect? Should I be putting out these fires with the firefighter trying to keep everything calm? And then am I being enough? Am I being a mom enough? Am I being woman enough? Am I being man enough? Am I being black enough? Am I being Hispanic enough? Because we've always got that imposter syndrome there telling us like, hey, you're not being enough of what society tells you you should be. And so all of those things really come into play, like you said, with being like finding your true self and having all those really balance one another in order to be the the best version and the self that you're supposed to be.
Yeah, and in this section, you talk about how that pressure can lead to a high suicide rate, specifically among teens, teen boys. Are men more prone to suicide? I know I attempted at age 12. Are men or boys or teens more males more susceptible to suicidal thoughts and actions than women? And why do you think that's true?
So right now, I think it's almost three times as likely for, or males are suffering suicide at least 3 times as much as females.
I think that's right.
But pre-pandemic, it was about double, but it's getting worse. It's getting a lot worse. And I've been doing a lot of reading on this and talking about like why are males um so prone to this, and it's really talking about a lot of the authors I've been reading talking about how many of our males are feeling uh left behind in society. The fact that they don't know exactly what it means to be, again, a real man. And so they feel like they're not doing the right thing that they need to. So they 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 spend a lot of their time in gaming or in a virtual world in order to feel safe and secure, because that's a big thing, making sure that they feel safe and secure. They're not really going to college because, again, what's really the point? There's no real end game because no one really knows besides like debt. Like, okay, what's the point of going to college? And then many of them are also not dating because, again, that's an unfamiliar territory. And unfortunately, there's so much available now that you don't really need to date anyone. You could get, in essence, everything you needed from the internet, or from some other tool or device in order to give you what you would need from a mate. So in many ways, many males, especially today, they don't feel really connected to society. So because they don't feel connected, they they don't know what to do. And that depression, that sadness, it just eats away at them until eventually the only logical explanation is to like not be here because no one even notices that they're here anyway.
I had a conversation with a friend and we were talking about a book and then I was just like, dude, this is a crazy realization that I had that suicide is like your body and your mind's attempt to protect you from the pain that you're experiencing. Like it's a really poor solution, but our brain often does that when it's in survival mode. And I think that gave me a lot of perspective on like these people aren't just doing it because they're like, oh, like, yeah, suicide. It's like, no, there is a deep, immense amount of pain that even makes that come up for you. And that's always like a very, I think, difficult thing to look at. And even as people, like, we're like, yeah, how do we even go about addressing that? It's like there's so much pain there. There's so much hurt. There's so many things that need to be addressed. And it can feel overwhelming, but there's always a lot of opportunities to find ways to make things better and to help to be a part of each other's lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I remember when I was 12, my goal was to end the abuse and also have people find me and realize that I need help if it didn't work, which it didn't, but obviously, but the what you say is just absolutely true, seeking that safety. It's a very insightful.
Thanks.
Yeah. I want to, so like you talk about childhood abuse, and can you talk a little bit about how that early on will affect your capacity or the ways in which you view intimacy?
Yeah. I mean, it's so complicated, especially for males, like the idea of being like intimate with those around you. It's so I don't know, layered and complex, whether that be a sexual assault survivor or not. But if you're like for some individuals, especially if you're a black male and you're sexually assaulted and it's by a female, it might actually be praised throughout the community because they might say, "Oh, was she good looking? How old was she? Oh, now that makes you really good at it. I'm glad you got it out of the way. Now you can be really good at it." But society doesn't view that as sexual assault. Instead, society views that as a rite of passage or a privilege that you've gone through when actuality you were just assaulted. So it really depends on, I don't know, like who did the sexual assault, what community you're a part of, who you're telling. But either way, it really gives you a distorted view of what true love is and what intimacy should be or can be, and how it's not just about sex, but it's also about building relationships and being truthful, being honest, and having someone that you could really lean on and rely on. So it's so complex, it's so layered, and it's different for almost every single survivor, whether that's male or female.
Yeah. I've heard the three components to intimacy are a spiritual intimacy, physical intimacy, and an emotional intimacy. But when you go through something traumatic, something abusive, some of those or all of those get really warped and twisted, and you start to hyper focus on, typically for survivors, it'll be the physical aspect,
Mhm.
in the sense that you either completely dive in or you completely withdraw, which is, kind of sad to see. It's always difficult to see hear that, because there's a lot more ways to experience those sorts of things, and always hard to see that. Um, anyways, you talk about Batman as the workaholic. He is always working, always trying to find a plan, has a plan for everything. How does that, relate to specifically the male survivors of assault?
So like Batman, everyone loves Batman. Like you mentioned Batman anywhere in the world, like Batman is that dude. Like he is a man's man, okay? But he's also like extremely hyper vigilant. He is someone who has to control every single situation because he doesn't want to feel like that lost little boy that just watched his parents get murdered. So that workaholism, that hypervigilance really makes it so that he knows what he has to do, he knows the goal, so therefore he feels safe. And later on, I apply workaholism to the Flash and how like individuals feel like they just need to keep going in order to keep their minds and their bodies occupied because that workplace is a safe place where you know what the expectations are, what you need to do in order to get praise, and then what you shouldn't do in order to not get praise. So many of us throughout our society, we love workaholics. Someone says, "Oh, I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. Why is that?" "Oh, I was working on this project." Like, "Oh man, great job. Keep it up." We don't say like, you need to take better care of yourself. It's more make that money, hustle. And that's what Batman is all about. And so many of us either we identify with that Batman, that hypervigilance that needs to control everything, or like that Flash individual who is always going, 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 looking for that next big promotion, that next big raise, something to make them feel like I am worthy of 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 living, of existing, when in actuality you're just running the rat race. And the only way to actually heal is to actually begin that process and to slow down and not try and control everything. But that takes a whole lot of work. It's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's interesting. I mean, I was always a workaholic,
You
and
still are a little bit.
yeah, still a little bit. But
You've
I
gotten
think
better.
that it's interesting that you say you were always chasing that acceptance. And since I've come to realize and started my healing journey about my abuse, I find that I'm not that way anymore. I don't feel like I'm working hard to get other people's praise. I find it's more just because that's who well, I guess I had too many years of practice. But I do like Batman, but um, Captain Marvel is also someone I like, and certainly in the movies.
Hold on,
You
wait. Which one? Which one?
um I don't know which one. So there are many different
So
ones. I'm thinking
it's
of
so
the
you got the Marvel one and you have the DC one. The Marvel one is the female superhero. The DC one is also known as Shazam.
that's the one I think that I know.
Okay, good. Yeah. So
So
Shazam.
is that the one you call in the book the dissociated boy?
Yes.
Okay, so that was very interesting. Dissociation is something that I did when I was being abused, and I've not really delved into it too much. So, in your view, is dissociation harmful, or is it a good thing, or and what can we learn from it?
I mean, at the time, like when you're assaulted as a young child, disassociation is a way to make sure that your brain, like you don't go crazy. It's a way for you to separate your mind and your body from the pain that you suffered. So it's a way of zoning out and making sure that you again you protect yourself. You protect that individual that is who you are. So you disassociate from that experience over time. And what is the problem is if you don't heal from it, or you don't fix what caused you to dissociate, like you do it more and more, and it becomes a way for you to cope through any situation that is not really helpful. So you can be disassociating from um, relationships, like any awkward or bad situation where you just sort of zone out. You are not paying attention to what's happening around you, and eventually over time it can lead to dissociative identity disorder, where you have those different personalities, and they are um, in a way trying to protect you from protect the self from getting hurt. If you watch Moon Knight on Disney Plus, that TV series, it was very much about like that dissociative identity disorder, those different personalities trying to protect that one self, and that's pretty much what disassociation is. And if you know what it is and you know why you're doing it, then you can start to pay attention to it and say, like, okay, why am I disassociating? Why does this make me uncomfortable? And then really figure out, like, maybe what is triggering you, and then possibly link it back to a previous memory that you were having about that sexual assault. And then it'll take you one step closer to like figuring out more about your journey, just one step further down.
Because awareness is the key then, I guess, because later on in the book you talk about villains and you talk about dissociation there too. So it's like, wow, okay, so villains have dissociation. You're thinking that, oh, this is not a good thing. So it's just something you have to be aware of.
Well, it's like the book, I wanted people to like really understand, like, being a hero isn't right, being a villain isn't right. Because in our world we don't have heroes and villains. We have um victims and we have survivors. Uh, and we have those individuals that see themselves as being victimized and unable to heal. And then we have survivors who find and say, this is something bad that happened to me, but I can heal from it and I can help others along the way. So we all have hero tendencies. We all have villain tendencies because we're all saints and we're all sinners because we're all human. So disassociation has its use and it's helpful, and it can be extremely useful, but it's not useful all the time. And it was useful and helpful when you were a child. It kept you safe. It kept you from going crazy and making sure that you could have two separate thoughts and two separate feelings at one time. Someone who you could think, hey, they love me, but also if it's incest, this person hurt me. You could hold those two separate views in your head at one time. But unfortunately, as you grow up, like that black and white becomes very much a gray area. And that's where the healing comes in. You could say, hey, disassociation as a boy, it was helpful, whether it be Captain Marvel or Shazam. But then as you get older, that disassociation becomes more like Two-Face, where it's like you can't make any decision where unless it's black and white, and the world is not that way. The world is very much um, a technicolor of beauty.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me when I think about the dissociation, where it's like almost like your body saying, I'm going to hold on to this. I'm going to separate it for a time being so that when you're older and when you're more prepared, it like almost knows like you'll be ready to deal with this then. And I think that's like I've started to like, as I've gone through therapy, I've started to have more of a positive relationship with these coping mechanisms, where before
Mhm.
I was like, oh my gosh, like, why do I dissociate? Why do I do this? Why do I do that? But now I look back and I start to realize all of these things have truly been trying to help me survive. They might not
Absolutely.
have been the best application. Like I
Yeah.
needed a scalpel and all I had was a hammer, which tends to
Yeah.
be the case when you're a kid. But
Yeah.
I've grown to really appreciate these sorts of these mechanisms, which has been a very interesting process to like have that even that compassion towards these things of, man, like this isn't the best thing, not the thing that I loved the most, but I can still see why it was trying to help and appreciate it for that, which I think is a very beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Robin, our
Yeah.
favorite character's sidekick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is such an interesting point. You bring up how it affects your view of parenting. I'm sure it's affected how you parent. And like, could you just give us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Like it's so complex. Like it's so there's so many different Robins. Like there's different ways of viewing yourself as like that parent. And it's so awesome for Batman and those different Robins because you can see like, hey, am I parenting more as a Dick Grayson sort of Batman or as a Jason Todd sort of Batman, or a Damian where you're really just sort of helping them and guiding them towards being the best version of themselves. So I really like that portion of the book, and I really love the fact that like Batman does offer an opportunity for fathers to look at how they're raising their sons and their family because he is a father. And it provides a different lens into how you should be giving your children room to grow, uh, while also making sure like you're not that helicopter parent, and like recognize your own coping mechanisms so that you can say like, okay, this happened to me, this is bad, but I gotta make sure I'm giving them space in order to grow and then make their own mistakes and then fall and then hopefully help them pick themselves back up. Like it's such a good archetype for understanding like just parenting in general. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know exactly where to go because it's so big, it's so massive.
What has been kind of the application for you? Have you seen certain things in yourself where you're like, oh, I think I've had this preconceived notion and I've really had to reflect on that and think, maybe that's not the best way, maybe that's not the way I want to raise my daughters.
Um, I
Or have
don't
you always just been like an amazing dad?
I wouldn't necessarily say like an amazing dad, but I think teaching really shaped the way that I've raised my daughters. Like I'm very much a teacher that says like, all right, if you think it's the best to touch the cornballer, go ahead. Like I'm very much that sort of teacher, and then talk about it afterwards and say like, hey, all right, so what should you have done better, or what could you have done better? It's more of a guiding rather than a telling, and I've always sort of had that sort of as my compass in the background rather than tell them this is what you have to do because I've seen parents like that.
Mhm.
I've seen them where they say they have to do this, but then when they get out of the house, they go crazy. They don't have any restrictions, any boundaries, and then they go crazy. But those that sort of guide them and let them know what they need to do, it really offers them that opportunity to learn and grow. And to say that I'm doing this by myself, that is just completely ridiculous. My wife is amazing when it comes to those things. And we really work off of each other's tendencies, where sometimes she is extremely, no, they have to do this. We have to focus in on making sure they get to the right school at the right time. And then different moments where it's just like, all right, tell me how that made you feel when pushing that boy and like uh almost getting into a fight. So really leaning on one another and to say like, all right, this is one way that we could have approached it rather than the saying my way is the right way. And but really approaching it from a, I don't know, an adult way of
A
parents.
balanced way.
Yeah, like uh, just leaning on each other.
So in part two, you talk about villains and the villains' effects on childhood sexual abuse or on victims of childhood sexual abuse. And you mentioned denial, addiction, self-harm,
Yeah, villains is fun.
hypervigilance,
Villains was awesome. Everyone loves the villains.
chaos, dissociation was in there again. and sanity.
Yeah.
And you covered all of those. Sanity seemed out of place. Can you tell us how that fits with the others?
Who did I put in with sanity? I can't remember. Um, I know I talked about the psychopathic kid.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, sanity fits in perfectly because like you have to figure out like I mean, there were plenty of times I asked myself on a daily basis, even now, like, am I crazy? Am I looking at this from the wrong viewpoint, from the wrong vantage point? So sometimes, well, not sometimes, but sanity is just a perspective. It's just a way that you view it. And so you may think like that hero code at the beginning, that is your sanity. That is right. That is the right thing to do. But then by the end, when you see it from a different way, you can say like, that's not smart. I didn't do that right. So sanity is all dependent on like, are you going to view this from the viewpoint of a villain where you're victimizing other people and yourself and bleeding on those around you? Or are you going to see it from the viewpoint of someone who is actually trying to support and help other individuals?
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. I know we mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but want to bring up Two-Face once again. His same response or same coping mechanism, one of dissociation, but it's different now. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, he didn't heal. Like, so you have those coping mechanisms as a child, and they're, you need them. But over time, if you refuse to heal or to get better, it becomes like those coping mechanisms become horrible for you. They become um rather than like you're still seeing the world through those black and white through that black and white lens. And in order to grow and get better, your brain and your understanding of the world has to grow and develop as well. And Two-Face, that's one of the major problems that he has. He he can't, well, I mean, eventually he does in different ways, but he can't really see the world in that middle gray area. Either someone is bad or good, flips a coin to determine where they're going to be, and that includes himself. He can't see himself as being a good person and a bad person. His childhood trauma, where he was abused by his father, and then the trauma that he suffered as an adult really separated his entire psyche. And so if you don't heal, you don't make that choice to actually get better, you will become a villain of your own story. You like there's no alternative. You may have been a hero in the beginning, but eventually those coping mechanisms are going to turn against you and you're going to become the worst version of yourself.
Wow, that's great. I want to comment that you're not a PhD in psychology. You aren't
No.
a professional therapist. You've done all of this from experience, from your own personal therapy and reading voraciously, right? And
Mhm.
you must be a very intelligent person to pick up all of this stuff from all of that. It's quite amazing. In part three, you dive into the healing process and you identify 6 stages. And I've read books by psychologists that it's very similar to the things that you're talking about. But your stages are a little different, so I want to get
Yeah.
into them a little bit. Let's talk about the first stage. You call it the emergency stage. What is the emergency stage?
It's where like you feel like the world is like you feel like the Joker and like the entire world is going crazy and you feel anxious, you feel like everyone's looking at you. It's that emergency stage where all the memories come flooding back of what happened in the past and you can't get rid of them and you are stuck and it feels like you can't get out of it. And for many individuals, that's where you make the next stage where it's the decision to heal. If you make that decision to heal, you go on to the next stages. You get $200, you proceed past go. But for some individuals, like they just get stuck in that emergency stage. They might find that coping mechanism that really gets them through, and they say, all right, boom, I'm fine. And then they don't decide to heal. They're gonna continue to push that off. But until you actually make that decision to heal, you're always going to keep coming back to, you're going to have a panic attack, you're going to continue to um just feel extremely anxious, extremely depressed. And I'm not saying like those can magically go away, but
Yeah.
until you actually identify that root cause and you start to make that decision to heal, then you're going to be stuck there. And that's really what that emergency stage
So is
is.
that the stage where men are, a lot of times they take a long time to come forward and or deal with and make that decision to heal. So that's the stage that men are in a lot of times 20, 30, 40 years even
Yeah.
before they get that help. So eventually it's going to come and get them. The emergency stage is going to get you.
Yeah. I mean, it's your body telling you, dude, it's okay. Like you this happened. Let's deal with it. Let's get better. And me, I personally think it took me, like, I think my first emergency stage happened in college when I had suffered that extreme depression, and then I dropped out that my freshman year, and then I ignored it. I was just like, oh no, I'm fine. I'm gonna go to work. I'm gonna get back to college. I had a new goal. And then it happened again when I got when I was when I was 28, got the new house. But at that point, like I actually did something. Mostly because my wife was like, you need to go to therapy. And that's another important part. You cannot heal by yourself. Like, there is no way anyone can heal by themselves. Like, these books are great, but I mention in the introduction, you need a support system.
Yeah.
Doing this by yourself is only going to make things worse, and you need people to support you in the process. And I had my wife, I had my brother, and occasionally my mother. But those support systems and Susan, my therapist, like those individuals make sure that I'm doing the work. I'm able to do the work in order to get better.
Yeah. It's healing is always found in community, in supporting. We're hurt by other people. Other people have the great ability to harm and to heal us in great ways. And I think that's a tough thing for survivors to sometimes admit to themselves that, oh no, especially as guys, they're always like, no,
Yeah.
no, I'm gonna do it myself. And it's like, no, no,
Yeah,
no,
I'm
no, listen,
good.
listen, 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 listen. Listen, I know it doesn't make sense, but trust me, it works.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that actually prevents some people from healing because they're like, if I heal, what happened to my friend group? Like, the people around me are those that are just as broken and worse off as I am. So you don't have that support system that you need in order to actually get better. So you're stuck in the position that you're in because healing is lonely. Like, getting better is an extremely lonely thing because, like, those people that you identify with, the thoughts that you once had, like, you're changing those. So you have to, I don't know, you're I don't know, you're a little different. And so you gotta find new places to fit in.
Yeah, I mean, the things that you so deeply used to identify with, you're not. So you even become a sort of stranger to yourself, where you're like, who am I? And all the things that I did, they're so different. And it becomes very strange. And yeah, it's a very weird process altogether. But, you include some writing exercises as well. In addition
Mhm.
to talking, you encourage people to write. The first one is Men Can't Be Raped.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Um, oh, the just my is it my journal exercise?
Mm.
Which could you explain a
Yeah.
little bit more?
Yeah, it was a first journal exercise that you
Okay.
suggested the reader do.
Okay. And I talked about my journey.
Yeah.
Y- Yeah. Um yeah, it's just that writing exercise that lets other male survivors like really address that idea of can men and young boys be sexually abused and assaulted? And I really talk about my journey. And I always make my writing exercises, I do them with the reader to make sure they know, like, I've done this. This is what I've done. I'm not just shouting from the mountaintop, but this is what I've done. So really let them see, like, yeah, this can happen, and it's not really your fault. And
Have you
that's
heard that before? Have you heard that a lot of times from different people, from family, from friends that, hey, men can't be abused. What the heck? Why don't you just beat them up?
oh my friend, my friend. I was in class last week, and one of my students says to me, "Why'd you let that happen? You should have just stopped him from you were the boy." And I like the student. She I This is not some student that I do not like. I have known this student for multiple years, and they are very cool peoples. But at that moment, I wanted to punch them in the face and say, "You are a jerk, and I don't approve." But it is so ingrained in our society. Like, it's it's just moments like that that remind me, just like, man, like, we are trained at a very young, like, this throughout our entire lives, that men are the ones who do the victimizing, and men are strong, and there's no way that a woman or a girl can hurt them in any way. And so, like, like, it's every day. Like, it may not be said every day, but it's definitely portrayed in every single way. I've had multiple conversations, and that's I think that's the most difficult part, is trying to change that perception. At least that was the most difficult part for me, because for me, in my head, I thought for the longest time it was my fault. And many male survivors, if they were sexually assaulted by a woman or a girl or female, they think to themselves, I should have been able to stop them. Or even if it wasn't a male, or even if it wasn't a female, they think to themselves, I should have been strong enough. I should have been able to stop them. I'm a man. I'm not strong enough. I'm not man enough. So it's very hurtful to the mind of a male to say, like, I there was nothing I could have done. It makes you feel very weak and very vulnerable, and many men don't want to, like, even touch on that.
Yeah, the implicit assumption that like because you are a guy, you have all of these things available to you. It also makes, yeah, it's like saying because you have all this strength, nothing bad could ever happen to you. But that
Mhm.
idea, like in and of itself, is like deeply flawed because tragic things happen to people irregardless of their status.
Yeah,
Sure, it strikes at all of us, and I think that is a really deeply problematic idea, and that's something that I've heard a lot too. It's like, oh, that doesn't count, or that's not real, or like, why didn't you do this? And it's like, well, I didn't.
yeah,
And it doesn't help to ask, well, you should have done this. It's like, oh, if I had a time machine, I would go back and I would change things. No, duh. Do you have one available? No? Okay,
yeah,
then thanks for adding nothing to this conversation.
yeah. Just making us feel more horrible than we already do. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Moving forward, your second stage, you call it the decision to heal, right?
Mhm.
Getting really making that choice to get out of that emergency stage. It is really a decision. And is it possible for us to heal if someone wants us to, but we don't want it ourselves?
Nope, not even close. Nope.
Okay.
If, like, your loved ones may, like, want you to heal so bad, give you all of my books and say, "Hey, this will help you. This is the great thing." But until you actually want to get better, there is nothing no one can do. So that decision to heal is all about the survivor, and that is them taking ownership for their healing. Yes, you were victimized. Yes, something bad happened to you. You had no control over it, but the healing you do have control over, and you have to realize that. because no one else is going to save you. Not Superman, not the Flash, not Green Lantern, not your wife, not your boyfriend, not your girlfriend. You have to put in the work to make sure that you are getting better. No one else.
You are
That is, that is so true. I have talked to a lot of survivors. Like, when I'll tell my story or somebody finds out about me or finds one of the programs that are on YouTube, they'll say, oh, I was abused also. And it'll be the first time they're told anybody. And I'll give them books and I'll give them things. And this is why I buy a lot of duplicate books, because I'll try to get them, get them the help. But if they're not ready, they're not going to do it. And I think you really do need to be that point in the emergency stage that gets you to break your silence. And you talk about breaking the silence, and most of us know the importance of breaking your silence. You talk about 3 stages survivors progress through when they disclose their sexual abuse. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So you've got like that sort of stage where they're just like, yeah, this really bad thing happened to me, and they're almost apologetic, and they want you to sort of feel bad for them. I think that's the second stage. The first one is more where they're numb and they just sort of go through the motions. They tell you about what's happening without any emotion to it. It's just almost like they're replaying a scene from a movie and they're giving you the details. I've been there multiple times in therapy where I was like, okay, this has happened, this has happened. And then there's that third stage, that third time, that third way of telling it, where um it's more in depth, more understanding, more nuanced about what happened, how that affected you, and how it affects like every aspect of you. But it's not really, you're looking for sympathy. You're not numb to it. You know what happened, but you're also just, I don't know. I don't want to say accepting, but you know that this happened, but you're telling your story. You're telling your truth, not trying to prove anything to anybody. You're just telling it as it is. And it changes over time. It changes each time. Each time you tell it it's not going to be the same, because different circumstances call for different emotions, different feelings, different times of day, different stages in your life. So the way I'm telling it here on this program is different that I may have told it in a previous podcast, or I tell it in the future, because I'm growing, I'm changing, and I'm still like in that healing process as well.
Yeah. I mean, for you, you've obviously broken your silence, you've shared your story. What was your kind of process going about that? Like, you're telling friends, coworkers, are you telling everyone, only select people? I'm sure you get a lot of mixed reactions as well.
Yeah, I started like once I wanted to take ownership of it like really quickly. I wanted to be like, oh yeah, this happened to me. And then I started to, like I wrote the book, I started telling everyone, I started saying this happened to me. I wanted to get the word out. But then like the backlash that I got from like my my school and my administration, like it really was like being victimized all over again and being told like to not speak and to keep it to yourself. And so I've learned, like, yeah, it's all right. So Superman, he at one point, I think it was like 2 years ago, he told everyone he was Superman. Like Clark Kent, he came out, he was like, I'm Superman. Whole press conference, the entire world knows Clark Kent is Superman. Uh Now not so much. Lex Luthor did some stuff and no one remembers. Um so I started to do what Superman did. I was like, tell everyone it's the right thing to do. But after Lex Luthor like wiped everyone's memory, Clark Kent wasn't like, you know what, I'm gonna tell everyone again. He was like, I told the people that I needed to know. And those people are the people that I love and trust. And I know that are going to be the most supportive for me. If other people find out, I'm gonna, you know, try and bring them into my circle. Uh, but I think that's what really needs to happen when individuals are deciding who to tell. Like, you shouldn't just go out and rip off your mask and say, guess what, everyone, Peter Parker, Spider-Man. No, it's not really going to work, because you're going to get a whole bunch of villains out there who are going to want your demise, who are going to want you to see you fall. You're going to see some of those individuals that abuse you and hurt you are going to use that against you and try to hurt you even more. And you just may not be ready to do that. And that's something I had to learn. Like, I wasn't really ready for that. Uh, to get all that, I don't know, attention. And so if someone asks me, I'm gonna tell them. I'm not gonna be like, well, this bad thing happened to me when I was a kid. But I do know different situations call for different versions of the truth. If I am in school and someone mentions, "Hey, you're a writer. What books do you write?" I was like, "Oh, you can check me out online. Just type in Kenneth Rogers Jr." I give them those opportunities to go and find the work that I've done, rather than say, "Oh yeah, I've done all this different writing for male survivors," because I don't know who I'm dealing with. Like,
Right.
I don't know who that individual is, whether they mean to do me harm, or they meant to uh, bring good things about me, and people feel some kind of way about having or saying that, again, a male was victimized, and they say, oh, I don't want my kid around someone who's been victimized, or a male that's been victimized. They don't see that as a positive thing, as a nurturing thing. And so I'm very selective about not necessarily what I say, but how I say it. I'm not just going to come out and
Yeah.
just wave it all over the place.
That's interesting. You say that that people don't want their kids around, or people around somebody who's been victimized. I got to tell you, there's a lot of us around, and that's what I have found. There's a lot more of us around than people even think about. You talk a lot about spirituality, and spirituality was actually really important to me. And people, and it's kind of an oxymoron. People think, wow, how can you be spiritual when, how could God allow that to happen to you? Or how could the universe allow that to happen to you? And you link them with forgiveness, spirituality and forgiveness. I'd like you to touch upon, why is spirituality important, and how does forgiveness go along with that?
So spirituality, it's not really a connection to a religion. Like, there's a difference between spirituality and religion. Uh, Spirituality is a connection to anything really bigger than yourself, a bigger community, and you having that connection. You have to have that sort of spirituality and that connection to something bigger than yourself in order to see a point in any of this. So I'm not necessarily saying, hey, these individuals, like, in order to have spirituality, you need to have a stronger connection to God. No, you can have a stronger connection to your cosplay group because you believe in what your cosplay is doing, and you're killing the game in your Gamora costume. Yes, that is you having that connection to something bigger than yourself. And it's extremely important to have that, and to see that it's not just you, like, you individualized, but it's something bigger, and you fit into that. You're in a community, you're in a group of individuals. You are not alone, you're not by yourself. And so you should find some way of connecting with others, and that spirituality is important. And forgiveness is so important, especially for male survivors. And I'm not talking about forgiving the abuser, but it's forgiving yourself, uh, for something you had no control over. You may think, I don't need to forgive myself, but you really do, because you think, like many survivors think, there's something I could have done. Like we've been told, like, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, I didn't. I don't have a time machine. And it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. And so I'm going to give myself permission to forgive myself. And that is not just, oh, I'm going to forgive myself on Tuesday, and now for the rest of my life, I am forgiven. No, some days I forgive myself when I wake up. Other days I feel like I'm a worthless piece of crap. Uh, and every single day is a different journey and a different way of feeling about and addressing that trauma and that abuse. And it's no one way or the other. This whole process is extremely cyclical, and you are going to go to certain stages at certain times, certain periods, and it's all going to, I don't know, intertwine in so many different ways. So that forgiveness is extremely important. I still battle with forgiveness. Uh, and eventually, when you get to some level of forgiveness, you're going to find different other things that you need to forgive yourself for. You
Yeah.
just have to, it's a journey. And that's why it's a journey. That's why it's a healing journey.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend once and they said forgiveness is showing yourself that you don't need to pay for something. And I love that because so often I feel like as a guy, like I become like masochistic where I'm like, because I did this wrong thing, I have to like do this stuff and I have to work really hard and I have to do this. And it's like forgiveness is saying you don't need to pay for that. That's not
Yeah.
on you. And as someone who is younger and still trying to find his way in the finance world, I think that's a very beautiful sentiment of saying, hey, that cost is not on you. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to say, like, yeah, forgiveness is a continual ongoing process for yourself to say, hey, like I don't need to berate myself for feeling this way. I don't need to pay for that in that way. And that's a really beautiful thing. And at the end of the book, you talk about resolution. You talk about moving on, putting it completely behind us and moving on. Is that possible? I think that's a lot of things people always ask. I went into my counselor's office and I was like, am I ever going to be okay? And what is your kind of take on that?
I mean, the resolution, it's evolved, it's changed since I've written that. So like the resolution for us right now is this right here. Like for you guys, it's this podcast. You are contributing back and giving back to the community. For me, it's my books. So that resolution, that moving on, it's not really, hey, I'm past this, but it's more your childhood sexual abuse and assault is not the defining factor in who you are as an individual, but it's more how you like it's a chapter rather than the whole book, and it's how you see yourself in giving back to that community and making sure like you're breaking that cycle. So eventually you're gonna like hopefully male survivors say like, okay, I'm good enough to actually go and build positive relationships with certain individuals, or to find a way to keep these things from from happening again. And that's the goal, to eventually say like, all right, this something bad happened to me. It's not going to define every single aspect of my life, and then I'm going to find a way to help and contribute and help other individuals.
And you're doing that with your series, and I think it's just so incredible how you relate the heroes and make it so relatable to male survivors. Can you tell us a little bit about the other books in the superhero series? They're a little more the heroes, villains, and healings, as I mentioned, is the main one, and then the other ones kind of are in more in depth. And you have a new one coming out June 4th. Can you tell us about those a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So after Heroes, Villains, and Healing, I wrote How to Kill Your Batman. Pretty much everyone hates the title, but it's to kill your Batman in order to save your Bruce Wayne, which really deals with hypervigilance and making sure that you are learning to understand your cognitive distortions, your negative automatic thoughts, and then learn to change those in order to be more intimate with those around you. After that, I wrote How to Master Your Inner Superman, which we talked and we discussed a little bit earlier, talking about looking at those different facades of the Batman or the Superman, Kal-El, and Clark Kent facade, and how those really help individuals to understand the internal family systems therapies and how to become a more complete individual, a more complete self. After that, I wrote How to Save Your Inner Wonder Woman, which was caregivers and loved ones understanding burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary traumatic stress to practice self-care and understand the healing process so that you can help those around you and not become the villain of your own story. And then from there, How to Slow Your Inner Flash, which really deals with workaholism and the flash and how to slow down in order to really become more intimate with those around you and to, not look for that next big promotion in order to think that that's going to heal you. And then finally was How to Unite Your Inner Lanterns, which is the latest one, which is looking at understanding dialectical behavior therapy and our emotions, and looking at that through the lens of the Green Lantern universe. So you've got different emotions on the emotional spectrum. So individuals, I know when I went through therapy, it was either happy, angry, or sad. Like those were my three major emotions. That was it. But it's really helped you understand, like, hey, I can have fear and hope at the same time, or I can have avarice and compassion at the same time. And it's really helping you see the synthesis and opposites and that dialectical thinking in order to become what's called a white lantern. So you're able to access and feel all your emotions at once. The one coming out in June is Heroes, Villains, and Healing, which is super excited for. Um, and it's the Marvel edition of the DC version that you have. And I really talk about the journey of a survivor and healing using the lens of Joseph Campbell's The Hero of a Thousand Faces, and understanding and putting that in the lens of like the emergency stage, or the hero beginning their journey, or crossing the threshold, or entering the abyss, and really talking individuals through the healing process using that as sort of a template. And it's really more continuous because that's what the Marvel universe is. And so it really shows like that continuity between it. And you've got like Wolverine in Disassociation, because Wolverine, like, man, like that dude, his memory is really messed up. Um, and then uh you have Doctor Strange, you have Doctor Doom, looking at some of the villains. Spider-Man, who was sexually assaulted, and I bring in one of the comics that they addressed in the 1960s, where they addressed Spider-Man's sexual assault, and they were giving comic books away in the 60s, talking about childhood sexual assault for males. And I was like, that is dope. So I like mention all that and I bring all that in, and it's like it's Marvel. So it's a whole different
Whole
universe. And
new
then from
world.
there, hopefully I look at other heroes as well.
You had mentioned this book earlier, and I think this is something that has come up for me, come up for the people around me. You mentioned the book about Wonder Woman. It's a book
Mhm,
for spouses, supporters of survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
mhm.
What are kind of your main points to those who are struggling to understand or even to try and support a loved one who is going through this process?
Um, I mean, it's so complicated because it lets them know, like, first, it really talks them through, like, looking at Wonder Woman, like, why are they choosing to help them? Because that's a choice as well. And so it asks them, like, why are you leaving your paradise island? Like, why are you that Wonder Woman that's leaving your paradise island? Are there any traumas that you're not addressing? And then from there, really talking them through like how to understand the healing process. And like I talk them through the steps of the healing process so they know what they are. I include a letter from my wife to other survivors, as other caregivers and loved ones of survivors, so that they know like what it's like to be in that situation. And then from there, really helping them understand like what burnout is, and how it applies to what they're going through. Compassion fatigue, where they might just get tired of helping. And this is for any caregiver who's working in a in a sense where they're helping other individuals. You might just get tired of helping those individuals, and so you might just see them as someone that you begin to resent if you're not taking care of yourself and you're not metabolizing your trauma. And then from there, have suffering secondary traumatic stress. If you're constantly being around those individuals that are talking about their trauma and what they've gone through on a day-to-day basis, your body does not, your brain does not know the difference between someone else's trauma and your own. Your body and your brain only know trauma. So you can get vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress, and then you experience that trauma as if it's your own, and you can have that same PTSD or CPTSD that that person that you're suffering or that you're trying to help. So it really talks them through. And then if you don't take care of yourself, you can become like a villain. You can become the worst version of yourself. And I use all that with different Wonder Woman comics and how Wonder Woman, like, she's like love incarnate. Wonder Woman's so awesome. Like having that love, and if you don't have that love and you don't take care of yourself, then you could literally become like a washed out version of yourself, where Wonder Woman becomes like the villain. She can't really control it. Oh, so good. Like her killing Maxwell Lord. Oh my God, so good. Okay, never mind.
All right, I'm picking that up for my wife. I think she needs she is a Wonder Woman, and I do want to have her read that. So a lot of survivors, they talk about you're not going to really ever eradicate the perpetrators because we don't know a lot about them, right? The abusers themselves. That it's really all about talking to children and making sure children are aware that, if you get in a position like that, you need to speak to somebody, or you need to. What are your views on that? Do you think there's a good time to talk with children? Have you talked with your daughters about your story?
I've not talked with my daughters about my story. They know something bad happened when I was a kid, but we have talked about sex. Um, my wife led that conversation because I was feeling very uncomfortable. Because they're only 8 and 10.
Yeah.
She was like, you have multiple conversations. You have a conversation now, you have a conversation again when they have their period, you have a conversation again when they start to have sex. And then that's where I put my hands over my ears and I started yelling really loud and like saying I wasn't gonna pay
But
attention
I
to
mean,
that.
you were 9 when you were abused, so
I
is that
know, I know, I know, I know. So yes, having those conversations is very important. And in my opinion, the best way to stop abuse or to like close the cycle is forgiveness. Like let people know like it's okay to get better. And like in my opinion, everyone deserves to heal. Every single person. Even if you've committed some god awful atrocities, you still deserve to heal. You still deserve to be held accountable for what you've done. But having the opportunity and having those conversations and giving people the opportunity to not see themselves as a villain, but actually someone that can get better and recognize what they've done really helps get rid of that idea that things have to be done in the dark and everything in that, like I can't be redeemed for anything, but really making it open so that if someone is victimized, someone is hurt, that they can say that this is what happened to them and give them the opportunity to heal and get better.
So that's it's pretty funny. Like I can only imagine, like I have a sister who's 14 and she be like, oh, like I had my period. Even for me, I'm like, thanks for letting me know. I'm still like a little uncomfortable. I don't know what it is. So I can only imagine, like as a dad of two daughters who are far younger, just being like, you mean we have to have multiple rounds of this conversation? Like,
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's just like disclosing and talking about like you don't do it once. And I think that's very much the problem with our society. Like we feel like, hey, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to do it, but you know what? It's uncomfortable. I'm gonna have multiple conversations so that eventually, like, I can let them know, like, if something bad does happen, I still love you and it's not your fault. And I can talk you through some things and make sure you know, like, hey, we can get you the support and the help that you need. And you're not a horrible individual. You're a, I don't know, you're someone that's loved. So it's uncomfortable, but it is needed.
Yeah. And I think you start to lay the foundation of this is something that we can talk about, because the first one is always the hardest, but
Yeah.
then hopefully the successive conversations are easier. And if something ever does happen, then being like, hey, my parents and I have already talked about this. This is something that I can bring up. And it's not me having to like bust down that barrier to that conversation. And I think that's also like a really great thing, as uncomfortable as it might be. So we've had a lot of talks with your daughters about these sorts of things, going to have more. What's next for you? What's next in your journey? What's cooking in the kitchen?
New book June 4th. And then I'm actually working on another memoir. It's a series of letters to the men and boys in my life that help shape it, whether that be my father, my brother, my son that passed away, or my black male students. And then I'm looking to hopefully start looking at some Marvel characters. So how to how to forgive no how to calm your inner Hulk, how to forgive your inner Daredevil, uh some other ones I'm looking at.
Wow. That's it's great work that you're doing, and we really appreciate it. And it's I can't wait to see the new book, and hopefully you will come back on the program again after the Marvel books come out or start coming out, and we can talk about those characters and how they relate. And I just want to thank you, Kenny, for joining our program today and for sharing your insight, your books, all your work you've done. Obviously, you sound like a lot of the psychologists that we've had on the program. It's amazing, and I just want to tell you I appreciate your being on this program.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was genuinely such a pleasure to be able to talk to you, to pick your brain a little bit. And we hope everyone who's watching that you found this discussion enlightening, comforting, and helpful with your healing process. Please go to our YouTube channels and all major podcast sites for this program, as well as our other programs from Voices Beyond Assault.
Yes, and please send us your comments. Leave your comments on this site. We really do value your input. There'll be other information at the end of this program and on this site in the notes that give you more information about Kenneth Rogers Jr. and his books and his work and how to contact him. Thanks again to all you survivors out there for your continued support of programs and organizations such as Voices Beyond Assault. It's your courage that gives us strength.
Hands on my chin, I was lost and looking in the glass of time. Was it just the wine made me cry? I hope I'm satisfied. I saw myself, an older man, folding up his paper plans and hiding it in his hands. Made me say,